going on, everybody? Thanks for tuning in. Ice Rice here. Up next tomorrow, actually, starting at 6 o'clock, I believe it is, from Alberta, Canada, Calgary. We have Eddie Alvarez versus Dustin Poirier 2, and we also have Jose Aldo versus Jeremy Stephens. And we also have Joanna Jędrzejczyk versus Tecia Torres, and so on. But those are the three big names on there. So let's get started, man. Eddie Alvarez versus Dustin Poirier are pretty much fighting for, I guess you want to say, like the number 3 spot, number 2 spot, something like that, on the wait list for the next, I guess, belt fight. Everything with McGregor just finished, and he can come back anytime he's ready. So I guess they're going to try to make that fight as soon as possible, and kind of holds up the division a little bit, but we shall see. Let's get it going. Eddie Alvarez versus Dustin Poirier. Eddie Alvarez is 29-5-1. He's 34 years old. He's 5'9", and he's got a record of 4-2-1 in the UFC. He's on a 1-fight win streak against Justin Gaethje was his last fight. He's got a 38% striking. He's got 23% submission and 50% on his takedowns. His highlights are striking, boxing, and wrestling. Dustin Poirier, 23-5-1. He's 29 years old. He's 5'9". And he's got a 15-4-1 record in the UFC. He's 3-0-1 in his last 4 fights. His one no contest comes to Eddie Alvarez because of the quote-unquote illegal knees. It was very controversial, and I guess we'll see in the end of this fight. He's got a 40% striking rate, 37% submissions, and 23% on his takedowns. His highlights are striking, he's well-rounded, and he's verbally, physically really strong. His game's improved quite a bit. Next, 145-pound division, we got Jose Aldo versus Jeremy Stephens. This is going to be a barn burner, guys. This is striker versus striker, just like Eddie Alvarez and Poirier. Jose Aldo, he used to be the kingpin at 145. He's got 26-4 record. He's 31 years old, and he's 5'7". 8-3 in the UFC, and his 2 losses, he has 2 losses back-to-back, which come from Max Holloway, which were for the belt. We got 63% striking rate, 23% submissions, 30% takedowns, and his overall skills are boxing, ground game, and he's very strong. Jeremy Stephens is 28-14 overall record, 32 years old, 5'9", 15-13 in the UFC. He's on a 3-fight win streak. 54% strike rate, 26% submissions, 30% takedowns. He's got heavy hands, KO power, and when I say KO power, I mean KO power. He's got great heart, and there's no quitting the dude whatsoever. We got Joanna Jędrzejczyk versus Tecia Torres at the 115-pound strawweight women's division. Joanna is 14-2 overall, 30 years old. She's 5'6". She's 8-2 in the UFC. Her only 2 losses come to Rose Namajunas for the belt, which is the belt that she lost. She's got a 95% striking rate and a 35% takedown rate. She's a former champ. She's a former Muay Thai champ, and her boxing's incredible. Tecia Torres is 10-2. She's 28 years old. She's 5'1", and she's 6-2 in the UFC. 3-1 in her last 4 fights. Her only loss comes to Andrade, and then right before that was Rose, who's actually the champ now, who she also trains with. She's fast, she's explosive, and super athletic. And she's really small, so she's quick. Next, in the 155-pound division, we have Alexander Hernandez versus Olivier Aubin-Mercier. Alexander is 9-1 overall, 25 years old. He's 5'9", and he's 1-0 in the UFC. He's on a 1-fight winning streak in the UFC, obviously, and his Highlights are his striking and his grappling, his ground game. He's 100% striking rate. His last fight, he knocked out the guy in the first round. I think it was really fast. It's like first, I think minute. Olivier Mercier is 12-2 overall. He's 29 years old. He's 5'9", 7-2 in the UFC. He's on a 4-fight win streak, which also includes his last fight against Evan Dunham, where I believe he caught him with a liver kick and put him out in the first round. Right, I think it was under a minute as well. 25% striking, 23% submissions, 52% takedown rate. He's a jiu-jitsu practitioner, and that's usually how he wins. But now his game's highly improved. Next we have Jordan Mean versus Alex Morano. Jordan Mean they're in the 170-pound division. Jordan Mean is 30-12 overall, 28 years old, and 6 foot. He's 4-4 in the UFC, but he's on a 1-fight win streak. His skills: 51% striking, 15% submission, and 34% takedown rate. His explosiveness, his hands, and his experience are the highlights on him. Alex Morano, 14-4, 27 years old, 5'11", 3-1-1 in the UFC. He's on a 1-fight win streak as well. 66% striking rate, 34% submissions, and 0% on his takedowns. His highlights are his aggression, his striking, and his grappling. Next we got Hakeem Duado versus Austin Arnett in the 145-pound division. He's 7-1-1. Hakeem is 27 years old, 5'8", 0-1 in the UFC. He has 1 loss, obviously. 100% striking rate. No skill percentage on the rest that I could find in the UFC, obviously. But his highlights are his Muay Thai and his kickboxing. That's why he's 100% on his striking. Austin Arnett, 15-4 overall, 26 years old, 6 foot, 0-2 in the UFC. He's on a 2-fight losing streak, obviously. 61% striking, 27% submissions, and 12% takedown. His highlights are his footwork and his KO power. Kajan Johnson versus Islam Makhachev. Kajan, this is in the 155-pound division. Kajan is 23-12-1 overall. He's 34 years old. He's 5'11". He's 4-1 in the UFC. He's on a 4-fight win streak. Lost his debut, came back on, and is doing quite well now. 36% striking, 27% submissions, and 53% takedowns. And his work ethic, his length, his speed, and his flexibility are his highlights. Islam is 15-1 overall, 26 years old, 5'10", 4-1 in the UFC. He's on a 3-fight win streak. His highlights are, his skills are 16% striking, 30% submission, and 55% takedown. His wrestling and his jiu-jitsu are his highlights. Godzmirad Antiglov, this is in the light heavyweight division, versus Ion Kutalaba. Godzmirad is 20-4 overall, 31 years old, 5'11", and 2-0 in the UFC. 10% striking rate, 68% submissions, and 30% takedown. His jiu-jitsu and his wrestling are his highlights. Ion Kutalaba is 13-3 overall, 24 years old, 6'1", 2-2 in the UFC. His skills are 52% striking rate, 48% takedown. His wrestling and striking is sambo, which is, I believe, like a Russian version of wrestling, are his highlights. John Makadesi versus Ross Pearson in the 155-pound division. You got Makadesi, 15-6 overall, 33 years old, 5'8", 8-6 in the UFC. He's got a 100% striking rate, 23% submissions, and 17% on his takedowns. He's well-rounded and an amazing striker. Are his highlights. Ross Pearson's 22-14, 33 years old, 5'8", and 12-11 is his UFC record. 71% striking rate, 28% takedown. His boxing, his Muay Thai, his wrestling, and his ground pound are his highlights. 125-pound division for the women, Alexis Davis versus Caitlin Chukagian. Alexis Davis is 19-7 overall, 33 years old, 5'6", 6-2 in the UFC, 40% striking rate, 46% submissions, 14% takedowns rate, and she's well-rounded and has great jiu-jitsu. Caitlin is 10-1, 29 years old, 5'9", 3-1 in the UFC, 79% striking rate, 21% submissions, and 10% on her takedowns. Her boxing and her jiu-jitsu are her highlights. Dustin Ortiz versus Matheus Nikolov is the 125-pound men's division. Dustin Ortiz is 18-7, 29 years old, 5'5", 7-5 in the UFC, 33% striking rate, 15% submission rate, and 63% takedown rate. His pace, his cardio, and his wrestling are his highlights. We got Matheus Nikolov, which is 13-2-1 overall, 25 years old, 5'4", 3-0 in the UFC, 27% striking rate, 47% submission rate, and 25% on his takedown rate. He has a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, and his boxing are their highlights. Next we have in the 115-pound women's division, Ronda Marcos versus Nina Osarov. Ronda is 8-6 overall. She's 32 years old. She's 5'4", and she's 4-4 in the UFC. We got 43% striking rate, 15% submission rate, and a 41% takedown rate. Her heart, her determination, her grappling, and she's ever improvement is her highlights. Nina is 8-5 overall, 32 years old. She's 5'5", 2-2 in the UFC, 51% striking rate, 39% submission, and 10% takedown. She's well-rounded, and she's a power striker. Next up, we got 155-pound division men's, Devin Powell, Alvaro Herrera. For Devin, we got 8-3 record overall, 30 years old, 6 foot, 0-2 in the UFC, unfortunately. 35% striking rate, 65% submission rate, 10% takedowns, and his Muay Thai and his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu are his highlights. Alvaro, 9-5 overall, 28 years old, 6 foot tall, 1-2 in the UFC, 22% striking rate, 78% submissions, 10% takedown. He's got good hands, strong, and he has a big heart. The reason I went through that so quickly was because I just wanted to get that out of the way so that I could jump into another video and actually expound on how I feel about the card and all that stuff. So I'll be back. Thanks for tuning in, guys.